Off the coast of Western Australia, in the deep, dark water where the continental shelf falls away into the Southern Ocean, something happened that no camera saw, no diver witnessed, and no fisherman lived close enough to feel. It happened 400 meters down, in cold black water where the sunlight has already given up. And the only reason we know it happened at all is because a small plastic tag, no bigger than a thick cigar, was recording every single second of it. The temperature, the depth, the light, all of it burning quietly into an internal memory that no one would read for months. When that tag finally floated to the surface and washed ashore near a remote fishing town, and when the scientists finally sat down and pulled the data off it, they went silent. Because the numbers told a story that should not have been possible. A healthy, 9-foot adult great white shark, one of the ocean's most fearless apex hunters, an animal that fears almost nothing, had been swallowed whole. And whatever swallowed her was something so large that, to this day, marine biologists still argue about exactly what it was. This is the case of the shark they called Alpha, and by the end of it, you will understand why the ocean is not what you think it is. To understand what happened to Alpha, you first have to understand the place where it happened, because the water off Western Australia does not look dangerous. From the deck of a boat on a calm morning, it looks like the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. The surface goes a deep, glassy blue, so clear that near the shore you can watch your own shadow drift across the pale sand 20 feet below. The air smells of salt and diesel and cold spray. Seabirds wheel overhead. It looks, to anyone who does not know it, like paradise. But paradise is only the top 3 meters. Beneath that thin blue skin, the seabed slopes gently for a while, and then it stops pretending. The continental shelf gives way, and the water goes from turquoise to slate to a black so total that no instrument we have can pierce it without carrying its own light. Down there, the temperature drops toward the freezing point of fresh water. The pressure builds until it would crush the air out of a human chest in seconds. And the animals that live in that darkness have evolved, over tens of millions of years, into shapes that have almost never been seen by human eyes. This is the Southern Ocean, the great cold engine that wraps the bottom of the world, and it is one of the least understood environments on the face of the planet. We have mapped the surface of Mars in more detail than we have mapped the floor of this sea. Think about that for a moment. We can point a telescope at a red dot 200 million miles away and count its craters. But the water 300 kilometers off the coast of Perth, in our own backyard, hides things we have never named. The people who have worked these waters the longest have always understood this. Ask an old-timer who has spent 40 years hauling nets off the southern coast, and he will tell you, quietly, that the sea keeps secrets. He will tell you about the times a heavy line went slack for no reason, or the times something struck the hull in open water so hard it staggered the whole boat, and then nothing. No fin, no shape, no explanation. Just the wake of something enormous, sliding away into water too deep to follow. Coastal communities down there have carried stories like that for generations. Not monster stories exactly, just an old, settled respect for the fact that the men on the boats are not, in that place, at the top of anything. The ocean lets them float on its surface. What moves below is not their business, and it does not answer to them. For most of human history, those stories were exactly that, stories. A fisherman's tall tale embroidered over a beer, unprovable and easy to laugh off. Because how would you ever prove such a thing? The events that fed those legends happened where no one could see, in a place no human being can survive without a machine wrapped around them. A predator does not need to hide in the deep ocean. The deep ocean is the hiding place. It swallows evidence the way it swallows light. An animal could be taken down there, torn apart, digested, and vanish completely, and the surface world would never know a thing had happened. The victim would simply be gone. No body. No blood on the water long enough to matter. No witness. Nothing. And that is precisely why what happened to Alpha matters so much. Because for the first time, by pure accident, the deep ocean did not get to keep its secret. For the first time, there was a witness. Not a person, but an instrument, strapped to the very animal that would become the prey. And that instrument survived. It recorded the whole thing and then floated up out of the dark and told us. To understand how that tag came to be there, we have to go back to the year 2003. In that year, researchers with Australia's National Science Agency, the CSIRO, an organization that has been studying the country's waters and wildlife for the better part of a century, were running a program to understand the movements of great white sharks. Great whites are one of the most feared animals on the planet, and yet, astonishingly, we know very little about how they actually live. Where do they go when they leave the coast? How deep do they dive? How far do they travel across open ocean, and why? For all the terror the species inspires, the truth is that a great white spends the overwhelming majority of its life somewhere no human will ever see it. To catch even a glimpse of that hidden life, scientists had begun fitting individual sharks with sophisticated electronic tags, small devices that would ride along with the animal and quietly record the story of its days. And on one particular expedition off the coast of Western Australia, they found a good candidate. She was a great white shark, an adult female, roughly 9 feet in length. By the standards of her kind, she was not a giant. Great whites can grow far larger, but she was healthy, strong, and in the prime of her life. She was, by every measure that mattered, a formidable predator, an animal that would move through her world with the calm confidence of something that had very little to be afraid of. The researchers brought her alongside, worked quickly and carefully, and fitted her with one of their tags. Then they released her, and she slid back down into the blue and was gone. In the years after, in the documentary coverage that would eventually make her story famous, she was given a name. They called her Alpha. It fits her in a bleak sort of way. Alpha, the first, the top, the one at the summit of the food chain. A 9-foot great white in the Southern Ocean has no natural predators. That is not an assumption. It is very close to a law of that world. Nothing in those waters is supposed to be capable of turning an adult great white into a meal. She swam off that day carrying a machine on her back, and as far as anyone watching could tell, she went back to being exactly what she was. An apex predator moving through her territory, hunting seals and fish, sinking into the cold and rising again, living the ordinary, hidden, unwatched life of her species. But the tag she carried was not an ordinary tracker. It is worth stopping here to understand exactly what kind of instrument was riding on her, because everything that follows depends on it. It was what scientists call a pop-up satellite archival tag, a PAT tag for short. And the design of it is quietly brilliant. It does not transmit as it goes. It cannot. Radio signals do not travel through seawater, so a shark that spends its days at depth is effectively invisible to any satellite overhead. Instead, the tag simply watches and remembers. Second by second, it measures the world around the animal, the depth it is swimming at, the temperature of the water pressing against its body, and the level of ambient light, which lets researchers estimate roughly where on the planet the shark is. All of this it writes into its own internal memory, a long, patient diary of numbers, building up day after day after day. And then, at a preset moment, weeks or months in the future, the tag does something clever. A small corrodable link dissolves, and the device detaches itself from the animal. Being buoyant, it rises, up through the black water, up through the cold, up through the layers where the light begins to return, until at last it breaks the surface and bobs there under the open sky. And only then, floating free, does it finally speak. It reaches up to the satellites passing overhead and begins to transmit its diary, the whole record of everything it saw, which means the findings never arrive in real time. They arrive later, sometimes much later. The scientist who deployed the tag has to wait, and while they wait, the animal is out there living a life they cannot see, and the tag is quietly recording an account of it that no one will read until the story is already over. So Alpha swam away, and the tag counted the seconds, and the humans went back to their work and waited. For most of what followed, there was nothing unusual to wait for. When the record was eventually recovered and read, the great majority of it described exactly the life you would expect an adult great white to lead. She moved through the water column the way her species does, spending time in the productive upper layers, then dropping down into the cold and the dark, then rising again. The depths were normal, the temperatures were normal. The rhythm of it was the calm, unremarkable routine of a healthy predator going about the business of being alive. Hour after hour, day after day, week after week, the tag wrote down the ordinary poetry of a shark's existence, and there was nothing in any of it to suggest that anything was wrong. That is important to sit with for a moment, because what makes this record so powerful is precisely how boring most of it is. This was not an animal in distress. This was not a sick shark or a wounded one or a straggler at the edge of its range, easily picked off. This was a strong, capable adult female moving confidently through her own kingdom, and the data proves it. For the overwhelming stretch of the record, Alpha was doing fine, better than fine. She was at the top of her world, and the numbers agree. And then, at one single moment in that long, quiet diary, everything changed. It did not build slowly. There was no gradual decline, no sign of struggle stretching over hours. There was the ordinary record, the familiar depths, the familiar cold, and then there was a break, sudden and absolute, after which the numbers describe a completely different reality. Whatever happened to Alpha happened fast. 1 second, she was a great white going about her life, and very nearly the next second, the readings coming off her tag stopped making sense for a shark at all. To understand why, you have to look at the temperature. Before that moment, the tag had been recording water temperatures consistent with the environment Alpha was living in, the deep waters of the Southern Ocean, which are brutally cold. At the depths she was frequenting, the tag was reading somewhere around 7.8 degrees Celsius. That is roughly 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to kill a human in minutes. Cold, dark, and heavy. The ordinary condition of the deep sea. That number, that low, steady chill, was the baseline of her world. And then, within the space of just a few minutes, the temperature the tag was reading did not drift, did not wobble, did not creep upward the way it might if the shark had simply swum into a slightly warmer patch of water. It jumped. It leapt from that frigid 46 degrees to roughly 25.5 degrees Celsius, about 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a difference of more than 30 degrees Fahrenheit, appearing almost instantly, and then, crucially, holding. Not spiking and falling back. Holding. Sustained. Steady at that warm reading, in the middle of the freezing deep ocean. Now think about what that means. Think about what could possibly produce a pocket of sustained, body-warm heat wrapped snugly around a satellite tag, in water that should have been near freezing. It is not a current. Currents do not hold a tag at a constant 78 degrees for hours while the animal carrying it dives through the cold. It is not a thermal vent or some quirk of the sea. There is really only one thing in that entire environment capable of generating that kind of steady, enclosed warmth at that depth. It is the inside of a large animal, the warm, wet, enclosed cavity of a living body. The tag had not drifted into warmer water at all. The tag had been swallowed. Let that sink in, because the tag itself could not have known it. It had no camera, no way to describe what it saw. It only did what it was built to do. Record numbers, faithfully, second by second. And those numbers are telling us, in the flat, unemotional language of a machine, that at that precise moment the instrument stopped measuring the ocean and started measuring the interior of something alive. The 46-degree world of the Southern Ocean was gone. In its place was a warm, dark, enclosed space that could only be a stomach. But the temperature is only the first half of what the tag recorded in those hours. Because the moment the warmth began, something else began too. The depth readings changed, and they changed in a way that tells its own story. Alpha, before all this, had been moving through the water the way a great white moves, patrolling, rising and falling within a certain range, doing the ordinary business of a large shark in a productive stretch of sea. Her dives had a rhythm to them, a signature, the kind of pattern a researcher can look at and recognize instantly as a healthy white shark going about her days. And then, at the same instant, the temperature leapt, that rhythm broke completely, the depth reading began to plunge. Whatever was now carrying the tag went down. It went down fast, and it went down deep, all the way to around 580 meters. That is roughly 1,900 feet, nearly a third of a mile straight down, into water so far from the surface that no light of any kind reaches it, into pressure that would crush most things we build, into a blackness that human beings almost never see. And the descent itself, the way the numbers fell, was not the descent of a 9-foot shark. The rate was wrong. The manner of it was wrong. It was the movement of something much, much larger, something big enough that dropping to 1,900 feet was simply what it did after a meal. And then, having reached that depth, the animal did not turn around. It stayed. For hours. The tag, sitting inside that warm cavity nearly a third of a mile beneath the surface, kept recording that steady 78-degree warmth, hour after hour, in the black and the cold and the crushing pressure. The animal hung there in the deep, and inside it, alpha was being digested. Think about the patience of that. Think about what it tells you. A predator that ambushes a 9-foot great white, a genuine apex hunter, an animal that spends its own life at the top of the food chain, fearing almost nothing, and then simply carries her down into the dark to process the meal at leisure. No urgency, no struggle after the first moment, just a slow, deliberate descent and a long, motionless digestion in a place where nothing would disturb it. Whatever swallowed alpha was not fleeing anything. It had no reason to. It was the biggest thing in that water, and it behaved like it. Eventually, after those long hours in the deep, the depth readings began to shift again. The animal rose. It moved back toward shallower, more familiar water, carrying the tag with it as its own body did the slow work of breaking down what it had eaten. The temperature stayed elevated the whole time, that same telltale warmth, because the tag was still inside. Only later would it be expelled, freed from the body, left to drift, and eventually to surface, and to send its impossible little diary up to a satellite passing overhead. And here is the detail that removes any lingering doubt, any comfortable, well, maybe it was something else. The elevated temperature did not last for a few minutes. It did not last for a suggestive half hour that a skeptic could wave away. It lasted long enough, sustained, steady, body warm, for partial digestion to have taken place. The tag recorded the full arc of a meal, not a bump, not a brush, not an ambiguous flicker. The complete thermal signature of an animal being consumed and broken down inside another animal's gut. The depth profile matched it, the duration matched it, the temperature matched it. Every one of those independent measurements, coming off the same little instrument, pointed at the same conclusion, and they all agreed. Alpha, a healthy, powerful, 9-foot adult female great white shark, an animal in her prime, an animal that by every reasonable expectation should have lived for decades more, had been eaten, not injured, not attacked and escaped, eaten, swallowed whole and carried into the deep and digested, and the only witness to it, the only thing in the entire ocean that recorded a single second of it, was a small tag bolted near her dorsal fin by researchers who never dreamed it would document the very end of the animal they were studying. That is the record. That is the hard, cold, unemotional anchor at the center of this entire story. Not a legend, not a sighting, not a fisherman's tale told at a dock, but data. Numbers written by a machine that has no imagination and no interest in monsters. Numbers that describe an event no human eye ever saw. And for a long time, that is where the story sat. Not on television, not in the headlines, not in anyone's nightmares. It sat quietly in the scientific literature, a strange and striking case in a technical record read by a handful of specialists who understood exactly how unusual it was, and largely unknown to everyone else. For more than a decade, that is where it stayed. A remarkable data set, filed away, waiting. The kind of thing that circulates among researchers who study these animals, discussed in careful, measured terms, its implications understood by the people equipped to understand them, but never broken open for the wider world. And you can imagine why. It is not an easy thing to talk about. It complicates a picture we like to keep simple. We are comfortable with the idea of the great white as the ultimate predator, the final answer, the thing at the very top with nothing above it. A record showing one being swallowed by something bigger does not fit neatly into that comfortable picture. It raises questions that are difficult and unsettling and not fully answerable. But a story like this does not stay buried forever. Eventually, someone with the instinct to see its power took hold of it and carried it out of the journals and onto the screen. And when they did, they gave it a name and a phrase that would lodge itself in the public imagination and refuse to let go. And that is where the trouble and the fascination and the wild speculation all truly began. In 2014, a filmmaker took Alpha's record and built a documentary around it for a major cable science channel, a film called Hunt for the Super Predator. And it did what a good film does. It took a set of cold numbers and gave them heat. It gave the story a shape, a villain, a chill you could feel in your chest. It handed the case its enduring phrase, the one that would follow it everywhere afterward: the colossal, cannibal, great white shark. Say it out loud. Feel how it lands. Colossal, cannibal. It is the kind of language that spreads on its own, and it did. But here is where you have to slow down, because the moment a story like this reaches a wide audience, it splits into two versions. There is the version the data supports, and there is the version that gets the clicks. And they are not the same. The sensational version writes itself. Something out there is big enough to swallow a 9-foot great white whole. Something no one has ever filmed, no one has ever caught, no one can name. And once you are standing at that edge, the mind leaps. An unknown apex predator. A monster science won't admit exists. And inevitably, the oldest and most seductive guess of all, a surviving megalodon, the 60-foot shark of the ancient seas, still down there in the dark, still hunting. That version gets the views. It always will. But it is not what the tag says. And the strange, quieter truth is that the data does not just fail to support those dramatic answers. It actively excludes them. That is what makes the real answer worth your time. Start with the most credible predator of great whites we actually know: the orca, the killer whale. We have documented proof they hunt great whites. Off South Africa, two particular orcas became infamous for it, killing white sharks and removing their livers with surgical precision, leaving the rest of the body behind. So, could an orca have taken Alpha? Run it against the numbers. Orcas are mammals. Their core temperature sits near 98 degrees Fahrenheit, the same warm blood you carry in your own body. The tag inside Alpha read 78. Far too cold for the inside of any mammal, but exactly right for the body cavity of a large fish. A great white is what scientists call a regional endotherm. It runs warmer than the water but well below a mammal. 78 degrees is its signature, not an orca's. And the method is wrong too. Orcas take the liver and leave the carcass. Alpha was swallowed whole, tag and all, and the tag passed through the heat of digestion. That is not how an orca kills. The dive fits a great white's range. The temperature fits a great white's blood. Every arrow points the same way. The senior scientific voice on the case, a respected great white researcher, reached the conclusion the numbers demand. The predator was another great white, an enormous one, roughly 16 feet long, weighing over 2 tons. It ambushed Alpha, swallowed her, carried her down toward 1,900 feet, and digested her over hours in the cold. And 16 feet is not fantasy. It is well within the verified range of the species. The famous giant film near Guadalupe, nicknamed Deep Blue and estimated near 20 feet, proves such animals swim among us right now. No unknown creature is required. No megalodon, which was real, but went extinct around 3.5 million years ago, lived in warm coastal shallows, not the cold deep, and left a fossil record that simply stops. The dark ocean offers no niche for a monster that size, and no bite marks, no missing prey, no bone has ever suggested otherwise. And that is where the true, quieter horror lives, not in a legend. In the ordinary. The great white is not at the top of its own kind. A 9-foot adult in her prime can become prey to a 20-foot one. Cannibalism among mature great whites happens, and Alpha's tag is the first complete second-by-second record we have ever captured of it. The real mystery was never what did it. We know what did it. The real mystery is how often it happens out there in the dark, entirely unseen, with no tag to tell us. So tell me, now that you know the numbers rule out the monster, does the honest answer frighten you more or less than the megalodon ever could? Leave it below. The next file is darker still.